As a group is settling up here, I just encourage everyone to sit down, grab your lunch, and grab any seat, even up in the front if folks want to fill seats. We encourage people to come up to the front or wherever you can find a seat. So if folks would come join the conversation, we're looking forward to starting our second panel. And as you see, we're the barriers panel, and you'll see how many folks are up here, because I think that speaks to the fact that we probably have more barriers in California than in any other state. And so as part of our solutions conversation, we need to also think about the barriers, and not just the barriers that are perceived as the sort of general policy perspective, but the barriers that are also on the ground and the barriers that are inhibiting the production of housing in the state of California. And so today we'll have an enlightening conversation with our panelists, and let me introduce them. To my right here, we have Brian Augusta. He's a legislative advocate for the California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. Dillon, he's the political and policy reporter for the Los Angeles Times. John Heyer, the first vice president for the California League of Conservation, wrong line, sorry. First vice president of the Investments for Equity Residential. We have Jenna Price, with the legislative affairs manager for the California League of Conservation Voters. We have Robert Wassmer, professor of urban policy at the Sacramento State University, and Marina Wiant, director for policy for the California Housing Consortium. And I'm Meea Kang, and I am a developer with Domus Development, and we build infill affordable housing in the state. But I tend to wear different hats because, quite honestly, from my perspective as an infill developer, I face a lot of barriers. And often I say, in one hand, I have a machete, on the other hand, I just have a lot of passion. And so part of what I have to do as a developer is often cut through the red tape, cut through the problems to try to move forward and forge new territory to get new housing on the ground. But quite honestly, I think it's very difficult. I think most developers don't want to actually fight and legalize density, legalize housing in the state. So we're going to have to really look at a variety of solutions that will allow us to move through these barriers. So I'm looking forward to today's conversation. And we're going to start off by asking each one of our panelists today, what are your top 2 or 3 barriers that you see from your perspective that are facing California in terms of the production side or affordability, whichever direction you'd like to take it. And I would also ask, if you hear someone stating a barrier, you might have the same one, think about a different choice. So let's lay out all of the barriers that you might see as being problematic. And let's start the other direction. Let's start with Marina.
Oh, good. And that makes it a little bit easier for me.
Sorry, Brian. You got to play. Pinch hitter.
As someone who represents affordable housing developers, our number 1 barrier would be public funding. But probably the second one would be uncertainty in the approval process. I have my classic example. I have an affordable housing developer that's working on a mixed income, mixed use project in a community of exclusivity, and has met every requirement that is necessary and still is being denied approval.
Next, Professor Wassmer.
Hi, Rob Wassmer. I'm a professor at Sacramento State, and my training is in economics, so I'll lay that right out there. I'll talk about barriers, but I think I want to preface this in terms of, this is really a price issue. This is really an economics issue. Economists get involved with some stuff, but this is really all about economics, and it's about supply and demand. And barriers, if we don't look at the demand side, which I haven't heard a lot about, there's always about people can't leave California, we're in this growth machine, we need 5 or 10%. If we don't look at the demand side, the prices are high, a barrier is people aren't leaving. That's one barrier, but that's not really an acceptable barrier for both the business community and the political community, but that's naturally a reaction in economics, so you need to work on the supply side. And the market is working. There's a signal that the home prices are high. Developers would love to come in and build, but it's our institutions. Proposition 13 has been mentioned, going back to the fiscalization of land use. Certain types of homes aren't desirable to be built from that standpoint. But it's the local control. It's our system of local control, and it's our system of NIMBYism. Once we move into a neighborhood, we may be even at this forum and talking about it, but when something like McKinley Village is proposed, which is in my neighborhood, I was shocked and talked to Phil Angelides just at a recent thing, how about 3 or 4 years it took him to build that ideal community and almost gave up on it, right? So I think it's the local control, it's the NIMBYism, and then our environmental consciousness, our liberalness about wanting to do this and throwing things up like CEQA and then the unintended consequences of it. So, I mean, economists always talk about opportunity cost. You know, the opportunity cost of us wanting to have this CEQA, this environmental quality, this local control, are high home prices, right? And so I mean, like the governor's proposal, we were trying to chip away at some of that type of stuff. You know, we want everything and don't want to give up anything, and I think that's the biggest issue. But I would put local control and CEQA, fiscalization of land use, those type of issues are what's constraining supply, which would be the natural response and bring prices down.
Great. Janet?
So this will be a fun conversation. So I think coming from sort of my silo, one being ledge director for the California League of Conservation Voters, and obviously we've been around for over 45 years. We worked very hard, I think, in the beginning to really try to put in place a good, I don't want to say baseline, but we created sort of the platform that was CEQA in 1972. We have to admit that it has grown and developed over time, oftentimes with sort of minor one-offs, and I do think that there are some needs to review ways that we can apply CEQA better, I would say, to issues like this. I do think that in this, also in a silo working within the political capacity that I work in, David Chu was right. We have to lock ourselves in a room. We have got to figure out how to get through to here. I have spent meeting after meeting, 18 months at a time, hoping that we being committee staff, legislators, folks inside of the building can get to some sort of terms of agreement on what it's supposed to look like, what we can do to help facilitate good infill development. And sometimes most of the time we end up falling short and we don't come to agreement. And that's been very tough. The political system here and the political climate here has been very, very difficult. Also too, it's, with all due respect to the administration that has proposed the BIREC proposal, it's the same administration that got rid of redevelopment. It's the same administration that has held off any bills proposing tax increment financing for transit-oriented development. There are opportunities out there. We do have to figure out how to get on the same page. I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you.
I'm John Heyer. I'm with Equity Residential. We're the largest publicly traded REIT in the country for apartments. In California, we have two major markets, San Francisco, Bay Area, and the Los Angeles Basin area. And I'd have to say that our biggest hurdles are, cost to build, cost to process and entitlement. I heard some time frames being bantered around earlier today saying it takes 2.5 years to process a major development. I would love it to only take 2.5 years. We are typically looking at a process time that's 4 to 5 years for major developments in major cities and urban development. The road barriers, the costs, that's where land costs have all gone up. Developers are stepping back and taking another look. Construction costs, it's been a boom for the construction industry. And they've been very busy, and because they're as busy they are, contractors are asking to be paid to move off of projects onto other projects or retool their operations to satisfy the demand that's out there. I think the biggest hurdle that we have now is the knee-jerk reaction that some communities are taking today, imposing overextending policies for affordable housing. In June in San Francisco, we adopted a Proposition C, which now requires developers to provide a 25% affordable component in their developments. Well, what has been the effect? The effect was to quote, create more housing. It has done the opposite. There are over 58% projects have dropped off the books because they no longer pencil. The controller, San Francisco, said that affordability component should have been only 14 to maybe 18%, and that supervisors may come back and and revisit this. Well, in the meantime, you've got, instead of 3,000 units on the boards, you're down to 1,250 units. We just got done delivering over 2,000 units in the Bay Area, and we have another close to 700 units being delivered on 2 properties in San Francisco. We were underneath that. You know, we did not have to provide that, and we did provide affordable components for those projects, but it's the barriers that the cities are throwing up that cloud the entitlement risk, that developers, you know, are stepping back and saying, gosh, I really don't want to risk that. The other issue that's out there is rent control, the specter of rent control. It is going to cause developers to really think, you know, do they want to participate in that marketplace because of those barriers and what potentially could occur to their product someday. Those are my main ones.
Thank you. Wiant?
Yeah, sure. So, two, I think there's, from a housing supply perspective, I think there's a lack of policy recognition that that is in fact a state and or regional concern. I think the best example of it, and it's good that everyone is starting to beat up on Brisbane. I think we're going to hear that a lot, right? But if you don't have policies in place to ensure that a community on a vacant piece of land, less than 10 miles from San Francisco, near transit, doesn't build housing, then your state and regional policies for allowing housing just don't exist, right? And so I think that's one concern. The second, I think there's actually a moral problem that people really need to grapple with. And I think, you know, I was talking in some of my reporting with a statewide renters group on the governor's buy right proposal, and they said, look, you know, even if you create a situation where you get more affordable units than exists now on a piece of property where there are existing units, the tenants that are living there right now are going to have to leave if that construction gets torn down and built with something else, even if more affordable units are created. And I think that until you get those groups on board with sort of supply level solutions, then you have a real moral problem with taking that approach.
Thank you. And Brian?
Thank you. So I'm Brian Augusta with the California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation, and our clients are, I think I'm the unique person up here, in that our clients are the folks who we're actually talking about here as we are talking about how do we make housing more affordable to low-income households. So from that perspective, I want to start with one comment before I talk about my 3 points, and that comment focuses on sort of, you know, I think the policy choice that undergirds this conference, which is supply. And Mac Taylor's presentation was illuminating, and we've all read his report, but I want to emphasize a point that has been made by many commentators in response to the LAO's report, which is that the notion of increased supply being a solution to the affordability crisis that our clients face is flawed. It's premised on the notion of filtering. And let me be clear, as I'll talk about, we support increasing supply for a variety of reasons. And as Mac said at the very close of his comments, many of the policy choices that would increase supply at market rate also benefit affordable developers, and we're supportive of those. I'll talk about a couple of those. But I want to emphasize that this filtering process, one analysis pointed out that it takes decades. It could take 50 years in some communities to reach down even to sort of the upper level of our clients' income range. That's a long time. And then you have to take into account that the gentrifying effects of older neighborhoods, which is the older housing stock, tends to also be the neighborhoods that eventually gentrify. So it's this cycle that may not actually ever result in our clients achieving housing affordability. So picking up on, as my first point, one of Marina's, we are going to continue as a state we need to continue our historic investment in affordable housing. It's part of our infrastructure, and we have had a number of years now where that investment has disappeared. We've lost Redevelopment has been mentioned, the voter-approved housing bonds, we've lost most sources of funding, and we need to restore those if we're going to meet that need. Going back, though, to a piece that I think benefits everyone, the interests that are all represented here, is zoning enough land at the right densities in the right places. And that's something that our organization has fought for years in refinements to state housing element law and the RENA process. And I know if you talk to anyone in this room, they have some critique about the shortcomings of both of those. But the reality is we have that process in place, and if we actually implemented it consistent with the vision of housing element law, we could achieve much of what's being talked about. I mean, up and down the peninsula, we have examples of cities who comply with housing element law in that they identify sites for, say, multifamily housing at densities that are prescribed under state law, but those sites really aren't available. They're either sites which are capable of being redeveloped but have an ongoing use on that site that is not going to be available during the planning period, or they commit themselves to a rezoning program in which, in the future, they will rezone the land to those densities. And as John Fogarty said, tomorrow never comes, right? So, I think it was John Fogarty. Anyway, so that's point number 2. And the third point, which has been touched on, but I want to raise one other nuance, is our tax system and Prop 13. And in particular, one, the shift that's been talked about in terms of shifting a lot of those infrastructure costs and mitigation fees to the most recent developer. I was talking with a developer in Central Valley, developer who's talking about mitigation fees and impact fees that get close to $30,000 a door. And so I think that public investment is great. The question is, how do we spread that across everyone who benefits from it? And the other piece, which has not been mentioned, that I think is an important conversation that's emerging, is commercial property and Prop 13. And taking a different tack with respect to commercial property. How does that impact our question here on housing? Well, as the LAO report on Prop 13 that just came out confirms, there are many commercial property holders who are holding on to vacant land for long periods of time because there's no tax consequence to doing so, because those commercial properties are not reassessed even as values increase. If we could create a system that would disincentivize holding on to that vacant land and incentivize the creation of that land to the highest use, which may be housing, we would see more available land in many of these jurisdictions and potentially see more housing production. So you were right to have me last.
I'm glad, no, because you picked up a couple of the ones I was thinking of too. So I get to play both the role of moderator plus panelist to some degree, because I have a lot of opinions as well as far as barriers. And quite honestly, it's hard just to sit here and listen to just nothing but issues, because part of it, part of our panel, of course, is to identify these barriers, and I think they're all big barriers. And I think, as Brian's just indicated, density and infrastructure are two that are critical to both the solution, but also to the problem. And I think, certainly as John's indicated, it's developers are often looked to solve all the problems of the past. And so as a new project comes in, oftentimes you have cities, and local control we know is very important at this local level, but we do look at whatever is new as the bright shiny object, and it's got to solve all of the problems of the past. And so in some respects it's going to be hard for me just to talk about barriers, because I think we also want to look at solutions too, and I think we're going to kind of do a little bit of that. Please.
I have one more barrier, and I think in the previous panel before, Sasha brought up the NIMBYism that we're encountering in a lot of these communities. You look down the peninsula where Mountain View, Sunnyvale, they're building millions of square feet of office, and you have a small project come up before council, and a handful of people are able to squelch a development proposal that might be enough just to satisfy 1/100th of the need in that particular marketplace. And I think we as a group need to really put a program out there to educate the public more, that, and this forum is hopefully going to help put us in the right direction, is that explain better why we need to have the higher densities. We need to look at rezoning of existing properties. We need a better reuse of publicly held properties to put into place. We have to, the densities, instead of 35 units the acre, they need to be 100 units per acre. And there's concern about the architectural aspects, and how it looks and blends in. There are ways to make some buildings look much nicer than just square blocks. But I mean, we have to educate the citizenry that we need to step up and build within our communities.
John, I'm going to ask you, because we heard Sonia in the first panel talk about her efforts around trying to get people out to support density. Are you seeing that in some of your communities that you're building in? Are you getting more folks who are advocates for density coming out to hearings?
Not enough.
Okay, great.
I think that if people self-select to live in a low-density community, and then all of a sudden a high-density project is proposed there, you're just naturally going to have opposition to it. Because I want to live in this community. This is changing the nature of the community. And I've actually was contracted by the Urban Land Institute to write a paper 10 years ago on the benefits of growth. To talk about it. But when you actually examine it very closely, most of the benefits come to the entire region, to satisfy these employment needs and such, and most of the costs then are concentrated in that neighborhood or in that community, especially after Prop 13 and the fiscalization that these projects don't even pay for themselves. So I mean, it really calls for that recognition and a need for a regional or a statewide effort to try to impose that building. And we have like the Blueprint Project, the COGS, throughout trying to do some of that, but it's all voluntary in some sense. They shame a developer who builds a sprawled community out in the suburbs, but we don't have the teeth like Oregon has, with growth controls. And where we do have growth controls, they're local, when they actually make the problem worse than actually make it better, because you can shut down a community, and we need a growth control around the entire region to push more compactness. But these are things that are anathema to most Californians, and that's what I'm talking about. It's a tangled web.
What's happening? I live in a very small community outside in the East Bay, San Francisco, in Orinda, and all of the council members their platform is no growth. No new density, and I'm kind of the lone wolf that's talks to people and try to explain the issues that density can be built smart. I mean, there's a BART station sitting right in the middle of Orinda. That site could be developed. Very little impact to roads. Yeah, there's going to be a little impact to schools, but for the most part, the people that are going to be moving into those apartments or those smaller homes aren't going to have the big families yet, but we've got to provide that housing necessary.
So I'm going to make it a little uncomfortable. So this is not just a housing issue. We think it's a housing issue, but it is a housing issue with multiple social layers to it. I think it is good that you are making people feel uncomfortable or trying to articulate to them why there is value in high density, good, thoughtful, high-density housing in these areas. But what a luxury it is to be able to self-select, to not have to be in a high-density area. NIMBYism, the not in my backyard ideal, and I think oftentimes gets applied to this idea of like people abusing CEQA for that purpose. NIMBYism is something that has there are two sides of NIMBYism. There are those who, and most of the people when you're talking about the education level, most of the people that are the practicing NIMBYismers, if you will, they're pretty aware of some of the density stuff, whatever the word is. They're pretty aware of the density and the zoning because they're the ones that are there. They're the ones that are showing up at the city council meetings. They're the ones that are showing up basically saying they don't want this built in their backyard, but yes, there is a housing crisis. We just don't think it needs to be sort of in Palo Alto. We don't need to accommodate people right here, but let's figure it out somewhere else. And then there are those who we really do need to educate. It's the people who do not have the fortunate luxury of self-selecting where they live. They are just trying to figure out how to get home, get on some mode of transportation that's going to get them to their job, and then get back home. And those are folks those are the folks that we should sort of be talking about, the ones that are at sort of high risk of displacement, and we put them somewhere else. How much is it going to cost them to get from point A to point B. And those are the ones that we need to educate so that they know that they should be, I think, really advocating for higher density, higher proportion of potentially, higher proportion of affordable housing units in multi-unit housing projects, because they are the ones that stand, really to be at the most risk of our housing crisis. We have 60 million people coming into this state by 2050. I heard a report, I remember when I started working on 375 issues in 2009, a report came out that said every single house built in a suburban area has already been built for everybody that wants to be accommodated. So we have got to figure out how to change the zoning in places where even folks aren't super comfortable with the idea of accommodating for higher multi-unit housing, so it is not sort of certain areas in California that are being disproportionately affected, if you will, by this housing crisis.
Agreed. So we've been hearing some gentrification. You touched on that, Jenna, to some degree. And I think, because bottom line, and this is what I also like to say, part of the challenge around building infill is that when you're building sprawl, cows don't sue.
Correct.
And it's a lot easier. And it's still, and I would actually argue today that it's still easier to build sprawl in California than it is to build infill. And, unfortunately, that's not what we want. But because of the politics, and I think the barriers that we've heard today, that's where we're shoving the growth. And it comes in, and it kind of comes back, in my opinion, to sometimes locals, because they would appreciate having the new investment in their areas, the new fees, et cetera, and they'll welcome housing units, even though it means a commute 2.5 hours each day to get to work. And so are there, besides education, are there some other things? I mean, do you think that there's maybe stronger sort of state policies that would sort of, work to make the locals a little bit more receptive? I mean, we talk a lot about education, we talk a lot about incentives. Is it a combination of these two? I have to go down to the solution route a little bit, because, part of it is I think I think this is a conversation where we're all in this room here, and I think we're all grappling with how do we solve these problems. So maybe, yes, please.
I think we tied into AB 32 and our greenhouse gas, and the SB 375, like Steinberg has pushed, put some money behind that, where, our goal is to try to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And as mentioned by a previous panelist, as planners have talked about, economists examining this, we need to change land use. We need to get people to live at higher densities, to rely upon more on mass transit and walking and such, and that that seems to be the alternative that would actually work. That we would infill, we would build at higher density, we'd build at high rises, but that's not going to happen locally. It needs to be imposed in some way as part of our goal of AB 32. And we have a housing element law.
Correct.
I came from Michigan 20 years ago, and I heard about this, and I'm saying, well, it's all right there, was mentioned. It's just not enforced. The governor, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know all the intricacies of it, but he could enforce it much more with threats of legal actions against cities, with threats of not sharing revenue with them. There is a housing element, and taking that housing element. And I've even written a paper 10 years ago about a cap and trade program, where everyone has to take 10% of low-income housing. If you don't really want it, you can sell it to somebody else, and actually then, okay, so your NIMBYism saying, this is so costly to my darn community, okay, put your money where your mouth is. Are you willing to pay $10 million, $50 million to keep low-income house? Another community will take it for $50 million, and you create this market type of system, and I don't think it'll ever go into effect. I think they'll take the low-income housing, but there's no tooth behind it right now, and I think it can be done.
I think the teeth part is a very important part of this conversation. I mean, we do have this system in which we have both a state mandate that's not really accurate, but the state is telling locals what they should do with respect to planning for housing for all incomes, and because it's a matter of statewide concern. But then we essentially devolve that to the locals. The locals adopt their plan, and yes, we do have some requirements, and the State Department of Housing reviews those housing elements, and they advise them as to whether or not it complies with the law. And then the system ends, and it relies on lawyers in sort of my field to enforce it. And the reality is, when you shift that back at the local level, we've been having a discussion about density. It's not popular. I mean, we are all going to sit in this room here today and say how much additional density we know we need. That's the trend. That's the trend in terms of climate change. That's the trend in terms of meeting our housing needs and our unmet supply. And yet, at a local level, I mean, when you layer on top of it that you're also saying, you know, multifamily higher density is also the proxy for affordability, then you've really got a recipe for success at the local level with neighbors who don't want to see that kind of density. And so how do we ensure that the state prescription is enforced? Because take an example of one of these coastal cities that Mac Taylor's presentation was talking about, Encinitas. Any update to the housing element, including its rezoning, has to be presented to the voters on the ballot, which is happening in November. What do you think the outcome of that is going to be? Are they going to rezone a bunch of sites to higher densities? I'm thinking not. And so how do we give, you know, to be quite honest, political cover to local electeds that says the state is making us do this and we have to do this because this will help us meet a variety of needs, and then come behind that with something that is beneficial to the community? That's been a discussion point for many years. How do we incentivize it? What's the money? What's the other things that make that work for folks? So
let me just interject one thing though on the housing element, Brian, is that cities, when they zone for their housing element sites, they don't control the land. Those are often privately held pieces of land.
Fair enough.
So they check the box and say, we've zoned these appropriately, 25 units to the acre, we're done. Yet there's nothing that they can do from a local perspective that actually could truly incentivize that landowner to build the units there. So as much as I appreciate the housing element law, even if we decide to put more teeth into it, the local governments, at the end of the day, don't build the housing.
Right.
They can zone for it, they permit it. And so I think that there still is that sort of challenge of how do we kind of bring those two together in terms of bringing local government to the perspective that they can zone for this, but then effectuate that housing. And I think that, again, is a disconnect that we have in the state. We need sticks, but we know that sledgehammers don't work. And so maybe let's go back to by right for a second, because it seems like, you know, it all kind of comes back to the state level to some degree. And last year I was successful working on a bill called AB 744, which looked at reducing parking requirements around certain affordable housing in the state. And parking, we didn't talk about parking as one of the barriers, but for me, it was absolutely a barrier. And oftentimes, parking requirements in the state are a proxy for we don't want those people living in our neighborhood. And so hence, places like Santa Clara or wherever are gonna say, I want 2 to 3 parking spaces per unit. For every bedroom we have, we want a parking space. And so I think because of climate, because of AB 744 and others, we're kind of relaxing that. And thank you, White House, for also saying that they recommend reducing parking minimums throughout the nation because we need to stop driving as much as we drive. But at the same time, are there some, I mean, I'm just sort of wondering, is there a coalescence around the idea that the state needs to take a stronger role in incentivizing or rather creating certain sticks to kind of affect change at the ground?
I think it's the only way.
Yeah.
We just have to realize that if we want to do this, it is as economists call a public good, you know, something that benefits everybody, and an individual community just making that decision is only going to think about their constituents. I mean, you mentioned a very good point, and I think it was mentioned by the activist sitting at the end here, you know, about, you know, at a city council meeting, at a planning meeting, it's only the residents who have the voice, right? And you're right, there are a bunch of people that would like this to happen, but that voice only occurs in California at the state level. You know, we don't have regional governance, we don't have any type of, so they can go to the city council and advocate for it, but they don't vote, right? Yeah. The people who vote are the homeowners, right? And even to a larger extent, the renters don't even vote as much as the homeowners.
Marina?
So. Well, as Brian mentioned, to deal with some of that is you need to provide the cover for the local elected, so that when they go to the grocery store, the lady down the street doesn't yell at him or her for approving the housing project. And so one of the things that we look at that's somewhat related to by right and somewhat related to putting teeth in some of these existing housing production laws is, can we do something at the state level that overrides some of these local land use decisions that are disapproving projects based on subjective guidelines instead of objective guidelines that a project has met these certain goals and put these things in place. If you look at Massachusetts, they have a state appeals board that you can appeal a denial or a ruling from the local level that makes a project financially unviable, and go to appeals board and say, and the burden becomes is put onto the local government to show that there's a legitimate reason why the project was denied. In Connecticut, there's an automatic right of appeal to their Supreme Court to override local land use decisions that, again, don't meet certain objective standards. And though creating some kind of appeals process like that in California could be that sort of shield that allows local governments to say, well, you know, we have to approve this project, otherwise the state is going, or the courts are going to do this instead.
Great. Please, Liam.
Just a couple of points. So there was a research out of UCLA recently in the last couple of years, I want to say, that found that the more local control over zoning rules, the more segregation there was in that community, and the more the less housing supply there was. That's number one. Number two, in my career, I can't tell you how many just horrible local planning commission or local council meetings on housings that I've been to, hours long, and everyone in here has done the same, but it's just awful. And you know, let's be honest, some of the reasons are really just cloaks for, you know, racist beliefs or beliefs that are classist or racist, and that's just sort of part of the way things work. At the same time, going back to what I said before about sort of the moral issue here, again, talking to the statewide renters group that I did, I think it's just useful. I know this is not just their perspective, but you know, there's a lot of work in community organizing about getting people to show up to city council meetings, show up from low-income communities to show up to all of these meetings and take a role and play a role in this process. And so there's some hesitancy to eliminate some of those meetings or opportunities to weigh in on you know, housing projects after zoning or whatever, because you are in fact cutting some of those voices out of the process as well. And so it is very complicated, but at the same time, I think everyone has to grapple with that if you are removing some local control over the process, then that does remove some folks' ability to weigh in.
Great point. Anyone else would like to add in? Sort of. Well, I think part of what we're also looking at is where I also see it is we have kind of I think as far as production as I see it, we've got sort of the high-end production of sort of luxury product, because those are the ones that can kind of pay their way through the process, whether you're paying consultants to get through the entitlement process, whether it's, you know, lengthy EIRs or whatnot, and then you end up with pied-à-terres in San Francisco, or you've got deeply affordable units where we can subsidize at least those precious few. We also have the burden then, and from the affordable perspective, that because there's such precious dollars, we also make affordable housing the deepest possible funding for the greatest need, i.e. at least a little bit of a bright light this year was the No Place Like Home funding that will provide housing for, funding for individuals that are homeless with mental illness, and that will also address that problem. But at the same time, we're trying to take on a lot. So do you see this being sustainable in the future? Is there a way that we can kind of bring these facets together or begin to build for the missing middle, which is what I also see? Oftentimes, I think the statement is you drive until you can afford it. And so you're starting to see suburbs become default sort of poorer areas because people are leaving closer to cities. I mean, what do you see as far as barriers to building housing for, frankly, folks that, you know, fall out of the gaps of either the high end or the low end? And do you see that being an issue in the state? Anyone want to chime in?
I don't have the answer for it. But that disparity is going to continue to grow and grow, and it's going to be, I mean, it's going to be on steroids, and it's going to be symbolic of what is happening in our economy and the way that we are seeing a complete, I mean, we are losing our middle class. We are bleeding our middle class right now, and maybe I am maybe it's because I date a union plumber pipe fitter, but I think that our best indicator of our middle class health and well-being is you can directly look at union growth. And I think that if we are talking about luxury, and presumably that allows for some sort of affordability for highly skilled, retention of highly skilled trained builders, and somehow low-income housing is something that we cannot figure out how to subsidize for, for union construction. We got a huge problem there. We have got to, again, don't have the answer, but we have got to figure out how to build both without limiting, and I'm speaking as an enviro advocating for union growth, but limiting our issues with prevailing wage and our issues around what it's going to take in order for mixed use housing, so that there are pied-à-terres that are also incorporated into affordable housing developments located in San Francisco that can be funded, and developers aren't feeling a financial burden by them, and are providing good, highly skilled unionized jobs as well in order to create that development.
Anyone else want to chime in? Please.
Again, I'll play the cynical economist, the dismal scientist. I mean, so we bring the price of housing down. I mean, do we assume that the Bay Area then, its attractiveness goes away? I mean, people are not living in the Bay Area right now because of the price of housing. You bring the price of housing down, the demand will go up there, people will flood in, and we go back to the same type of situation. Or in all of California, people are leaving California, people are coming. So I think this whole idea of just getting the price down as being the nirvana that's going to cause a problem. The price serves an allocation mechanism. So I think we always need to think about that, and we need to think about these larger state controls in regard to density and building certain types of products that can accommodate this amount of growth. So that's why I don't think we can subsidize our way out of it. That it's just not possible. If California is still attractive, water is going to be our big issue too. That's what's going to probably keep people away from California at some point.
You got to decide what kind of San Francisco you want. I lived in San Francisco for 6 years. When I left, I was in a junior 1-bedroom paying $1,500 a month. And I can't believe that I'm going to say that was a steal. That same 450 square foot apartment right now in Upper Market is going for $3,750. It is it's not just about creating the availability for the housing. It's deciding who still gets to live there. I mean, the entire Mission District is not the Mission District that it was 10 years ago. And we are talking from a moral capacity. It's not just about providing the housing, it's about retention of culture. It's about retention of livelihood. I mean, it's kind of, we should be able to figure out both. We are a state of 39 million people. We are the 6th largest economy in the world. We have a lot of smart people 2 blocks away. We have a lot of smart people in local government. We have got to figure out how to do both. And I think it's a false choice.
How about Liam, then Marina?
Can I make a quick point on retention of culture issue? I think on that, again, we have to, if we're going to talk about retention of culture being a good that we want to preserve, it gets complicated to talk about which culture is good to preserve and which culture is not, right? Folks living in single-family suburban homes will say, this is the culture we want, so this is why we are going to try to keep housing from being built. If that's not good, then what's the line, or how do you adjudicate between that and, say, retention of Latino culture in the Mission, and that is good and something we do want to preserve? And I don't know how you legislate something like that, or are able to do that in a... Yeah.
Well, one of the things we have to try and figure out how to do, there are several communities in the state that have restriction on housing. And something that needs to be implemented and adjusted within those communities is applying a means testing to those units that are supposed to be affordable units. We have a lot of people gaming the system. We have a lot of units that have been in a family who probably when they moved in 20 years ago qualified for that, but because of the rent control aspect in some of these communities, it's just a slow chug. And now there might be people living in these units who can really afford to be in a middle or even an upper end product, freeing up those units to allow the people who really do need to have those to keep that affordable component in place within those communities.
Well, I want to go back quickly to what you asked at the very beginning of this thread. To me, I heard it more as focusing on, we've lost significant funding for affordable housing development production in the state. And the few programs that have been created since the demise of redevelopment have been very targeted niche programs, which have great merit. But they target a very small subset of the population of our low-income workers. And I'm going to throw the wrench in, and I'm then going to hand the mic over to Brian Augusta to deal with this. Inclusionary zoning, which was brought up by the White House as a solution to deal with the increasing inclusive communities and ensuring that we are meeting the needs of people at all income levels, is a solution to the problem. And that needs to be paired with funding by the state to help produce that housing. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, no, thank you for raising that, because I also wanted to raise that in defense of the point that Jenna is making, which is that as we grow, whether it's in San Francisco or in other cities, additional investment and development has the impact of, in many communities, of raising real estate values overall. And what is the impact of folks who are living in those communities? Well, we're seeing it in San Francisco, which is, and Assemblymember Chu talked about it earlier, it used to be you drive across the bridge to Oakland. Now the folks that were living in Oakland are being pushed out there. So how do we sort of ensure, as they say, that all boats rise with rising tides? And inclusionary is one piece of that puzzle, and it's become sort of the big bad wolf. And we've done a number of, we've been working on this issue for a number of years now, but really it can work, especially in a hot housing market, exactly the kind of place where we're seeing that gentrification and displacement is occurring. A well-crafted policy, and the percentages were mentioned earlier as being sort of the touchstone, but if you hit that right mark, and this economic analysis in San Francisco demonstrates that they could support a higher policy there with current market conditions, we can do both. And in fact, when you leave here, or if you're bored while I'm talking, you can pull up Google Cornerstone Partnership and Inclusionary Calculator. And they have a very sophisticated tool that allows someone like yourself, or even as dim as me, to put in this right inputs, and you can determine what percentage would be supported and still provide a good rate of return to the developer and produce affordable units. And that's where I think, as we debate inclusionary, the debate should be not about whether or not it's a policy that can help us achieve both production and affordability goals.
This isn't something that should be borne by the developers, the providers of housing. If I can't afford to go into the grocery store and buy groceries, I get a federal program. It's called food stamps. They're subsidizing me so I can afford to eat. We can't put the burden on landlords that because there's a social economic problem that one sector of business has to bear the burden. I mean, this has to be either a state or federal level program that is putting dollars into it. We dissolved the redevelopment agencies. That was a failed mistake. There has to be something else that can come in that can provide these necessary dollars for these communities to seed these projects, to provide the opportunity for these affordable developers to come in and build the units necessary. But and I'm going to take a little, to go to a calculator and say, okay, this developer can pay this much more to make an affordable component work. We're seeing right now, Prop C, killing the market. It's doing the exact opposite that you wanted to achieve and provide more housing. You see developers pulling out saying, can't build it, costs too much. So it's got to be at a higher level. It's got to be a state or a federal implementation of some dollars, however it's done, to go into these communities.
Can I ask sort of a question of the panel? I'm going to take your job for a second.
Sure,
I'm curious about this. But is this I'm curious to know, is this Do we look at this as a sort of a blanket approach, or is this based on, is it a regional? I mean, is this a regional approach that the state or the feds would take? And do they, I mean, again, I get back to like 39 million people. California is one of the most geographically and honestly ethnically diverse places in the nation. We've got different socioeconomic standings everywhere. I mean, do you take a state or federal approach and apply it to the entire state of California, or is it broken down regionally?
I would say the whole state.
Okay.
Okay. On that note, I'm going to open it up to questions on the floor. So does anyone in the audience, would they like to pose a question to this esteemed panel, or would you like to raise your own barrier? Sir, at the end.
Hello, my name is Tom Scott. One of the things you touched on earlier in your presentation was the city's reluctance to build housing. And one of the things that some of them openly say and some don't openly say is that housing doesn't pay for itself because of the taxes generated to supply the neighborhood services. My question is, does new housing pay for itself by virtue of the fact that it's paying at a higher rate than they say the average for a neighborhood? And if so, at what price point would it pay for itself?
Thank you for the question. Maybe the economist might have an answer.
I mean, I think it depends upon the assessed value of the home. You know, when it's built, you can pretty much see that, you know, the 2% that's going to be applied to it, you know, and then you know, what the money that's going to bring in, and the calculation is just done, and it's I'm sorry, 1%, is it 2%? 2% is going to raise in value each year. 1% under Prop 13, you know, and the calculation is done. It has to be a $500,000 home, you know, to make it pay for itself. And so, I mean, that's where the fiscal additional land use, we don't preclude the building of homes, we just preclude the building of certain types of homes, and that's that I think is the issue.
Correct. And then I'll also throw out that when city councils make a judgment call on whether that 27 acres is going to be a Walmart or a Target, or say, you know, 50 new homes, oftentimes the cities are going to chase sales tax dollars because they will stay more local rather than property tax, which is primarily goes to the state. And so, again, I think as we touched on here, local control, as much as I think it's sort of historic in California, it also has its own biases. And I think as a result, as we've heard today, I think local control is one of those issues where it's the touchstone for so many of the barriers, because we've got state policies that want to incite growth in certain infill areas, that want to sort of fulfill the dreams of SB 375 and AB 32 and low carbon connected neighborhoods, and yet, you know, we find ourselves still begging our council members, who are in some cases, you know, protecting their way of life, and so we've got these inherent conflicts. And so I think, as this panel has really shown, in order for us to move forward, we do need to have that serious talk as to which one of these sort of historic power centers are willing to actually modify a little bit. Like, what pieces where can we kind of see a path forward? And I think it seems like definitely the state needs to lead. It needs to lead on finance. I think we know that affordable housing has been absolutely decimated in terms of its production since the demise of redevelopment. We know that infrastructure, the lack of infrastructure expenditures has been historically problematic. The encouragement of housing production when it comes to density is not one that often sits well with suburban communities, and yet these are the communities that are growing. Oftentimes these are the communities that have great infill opportunities in our suburban communities, yet we don't have the local support to make that happen. And then I think when we are at the state level, we've got great ideas like buy right, but then we have institutional, somewhat siloed, you know, groups that have a different opinion, and everybody wants everything, right? It's the Christmas tree approach. And so I think, as we've all seen today, it's really going to take all of us to come up with solutions, and it's going to also mean coming to the conversation, letting go of our own biases or letting go of our own objectives and protectionism to sort of realize that it's going to take all of these solutions to move us forward. It's going to take us putting down our arms, perhaps, and realizing that we're all part of this solution, because there's a lot of great need here. And I think at the same time, we do look at the state and their leadership to present, I think, a set of tools that at the local level can start to be effective. And I think local control is very important. I think the cities are very vital to this conversation, but at the same time, these barriers do exist, and it's not because the city council member started it, it's because its long history has been there, and quite honestly, Prop 13, as we've heard a lot today.
I mean, and, you know, the institution has arisen because this is what Californians wanted. You know, there's a famous economist, Bill Fiscal, who's written this book called The Home Voter Hypothesis. You know, that voters are largely residents who own home and own property, and they vote the value of their property. That's the most important thing. And to preserve the value of property, you want that local control, you want that type of zoning, you want that type of NIMBYism. So I mean, it's you know, the institution is here because of that. It's been altered because of Prop 13, in part that was generating Prop 13. So you know, how do we get a change of consciousness that people just don't think about themselves and their property values? I mean, it's probably renters who don't have that direct, getting them more active in the process and voting in the place that they live. But then, yeah, and renters have that interest. We need more apartments being built because then my rent will come down, right? But the existing apartment owners don't want no apartments built, right? New apartments built, because then the rents will come down too, and their returns will go down. So it's a complex process, and it needs to be taken outside of some larger social goal than just individuals and communities, and we're not very good at that. And our politics have even moved farther away from doing stuff like that.
And there are, I mean, we could talk for hours about why the politics have moved away, but I mean, 2 blocks over in the Capitol, we need to make sure that our legislators need to represent their residents and their constituents, not just their voters. And there is that is something that we're seeing happen all too often, where it's really a representation of the voters, as opposed to thinking about, again, the entirety of the community of California.
Great. So maybe John, Liam, Brian, Marina, last finished thoughts? Maybe we just have a few minutes left, so maybe 30 seconds. Do you have any other last parting words for our next panel, that is the solutions panel?
Fix it.
Build it. Build more.
For me, I think from a state perspective, I think it's very easy to see a coming clash, and this was mentioned this morning as well, between the state's environmental goals and the policies of local land use control. I mean, in really any way that the environmental goals are going to be met, it's going to be met with more infill housing. And just as an example of this, you know, and not to pick on Senator Pavley, who is, you know, rightfully considered one of the leaders in pushing for the state's really aggressive climate programs. She voted against one of the ADU bills this year, and the reason for that was local control issues. And so, if people don't understand sort of the link between, even people who are enmeshed, one of the leaders in the environmental movement, don't understand that connection, or believe, rather, maybe a better way of phrasing it, believe local control is a priority over land use is a priority over that, then I think that's going to be a really difficult conversation that we're going to be forced to have very, very soon.
Brian? Sorry. Brian, then Marina.
Are you calling on me?
Yeah, you got 30 seconds.
Okay, well then I'll just try to say something really positive so we can end on it. I mean, despite the differing perspectives up here, I think there's also a lot that we agree on, and part of that goal is expanding the supply of housing that's affordable, that meets the needs of everyone in California. So whether the question is inclusionary or CEQA or displacement or any of these other questions, I think it's encouraging that we're having these conversations in a way that in recent years we have not. And I don't think that necessarily points us to an easy policy solution, but it definitely has the conversation going in a direction that I think can help move that forward.
Great. Marina, final word.
Also on the positive note, I'm hopeful that we'll see some interesting proposals come out next year, but I caution the perfect be the enemy of the good mentality. It's something that I deal with within our organization and our board. So often the developers and financiers of projects, they want the big sexy solution to be what we work on, when incremental change can be productive also. And you know, one of the notes in the LAO report was about how it's taken us years and years to get into this mess, and it's going to take many years for us to get out of it. And so it's okay for us to do, you know, small steps each year that get us towards that big solution.
Well, thank you so much, panelists. I hope you all will help me thank the panel today, and we look forward to the next panel.